We're going to jump in and show you a whole bunch more ins and outs with fills, strokes, editing corners, and duplicating step and repeat, and so on. A couple things that I like to make really clear when we're working with the stroke weight of objects and how these things actually work. We can take an object and obviously apply a stroke to it, and we can apply a stroke of any color that we want to. And when we apply a stroke to an object, there's a couple things that we really need to pay attention to when we're applying a stroke weight to an object. And the one thing that we want to pay attention to here is, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but when I apply a stroke to an object here, we actually have the align stroke feature, which when I apply a stroke to an object, it's going to equally distribute the stroke both inside and outside the object. And it may not seem like a big deal until we try to line things up together or put things up to a guide. And if I were aligning this to a guide on the page here, say turning on my rulers here and putting a guide right here, and I align an object here, you'll notice that my object doesn't align on the edge of my stroke, it aligns on the actual bounding box of my stroke. So in the stroke panel, I have the default, which is always going to align the stroke to the center of my object, and therefore as the stroke grows or shrinks, the object stays the same size, but the stroke grows inside and out. If I'm really concerned about keeping my objects aligned, regardless of the size of the stroke, aligning the stroke to the inside of my object here allows me to increase or decrease the size of the stroke without changing the size of the container. By the way, when you measure your container, it's actually to the bounding box. I can also go and switch my stroke to the outside, which means no matter how big or how small I make my stroke right here, it's not going to change the size of my container. Now, you would think that by changing the size of the stroke, it changes the size of the container. It doesn't. The size stays the same. If I make this 3x3 or 3x2 here, 3x3, and I change the size of my object here, that size doesn't change. So I know a lot of people think, oh, if I make it bigger, it's going to change. No, it only measures the actual container itself. It has nothing to do with the stroke. So keep that in mind when you're applying your stroke to your objects of whether or not you want to have it aligned in the center, to the inside, or to the outside of your container, because it will change the size, but it does not register the actual size change. So I like to run everything on the inside of my container, simply because then I know my containers are always going to line up right on my guides. But that's a personal preference, and we will have to change that as we go. For now, I'm just going to run in the default mode, which is align the stroke to the center of my object. I'm going to turn my rulers back off, which is Command or Control R. We're going to get to the rulers in a bit. When I have my stroke on my object, I'm going to apply the stroke on my object, and I can go to my color panel, which I can just go into my window menu and call up my color right there. I can apply my stroke and my fill. Up here in the control bar, I've got my drop-down menus to choose from my list of colors for both my stroke and my fill, but I also have the older style down here in the toolbar for the stroke and the fill. Quick and easy way to bring the fill to be active or the stroke to be active is just simply the letter X. And X will go in, if you pay attention down here, if I click on X, it just brings my stroke to be active, and then it brings my fill to be active. That's something that's important to know, because as you're getting through here and applying your fills and your strokes, doing that quite awesome. If I do Shift X is going to swap my stroke for my fill. Now in general, I will have strokes on my objects if I truly want a stroke that is going to be a different color than my container. Out of habit, I do not stroke an object with the same color as the fill, simply because you don't remember that you have a stroke on your object. So if you find yourself putting a stroke and a fill on an object of the same color, I recommend getting rid of the stroke. It can cause some hiccups later. And another quick and easy way is, if you do want to do the same fill and stroke on an object right here, is you can simply drag it down here at the bottom of your toolbar. You can simply drag and drop your fill to your stroke or your stroke to your fill color there to apply one to the other. If you want to shut one of those off too, you can bring either one to be active. Say I want to shut the fill off. I can click on a little no fill, which is just my / right there. And if I do that, that will then shut off my stroke or my fill, depending on which one that I have active. So a couple little shortcuts that you have there for doing the stroke and the fill. Now, the reason why I spend so much time on concern about the stroke, and more so the stroke and the fill here, is when we get into our Pathfinder tool, strokes and fills act very differently. So I want to talk about that when we get to that point and see. But just keep in mind how our stroke is going to align when we actually align these items. It is not to the edge of the stroke, it is to the edge of the physical container. I'm going to draw a line here, and I'm going to apply a stroke to the line. And in this case, I'm going to just round the end caps right here. This is a stroke. So when I apply a color to the stroke, I go to my stroke section or my drop-down menu here, and I choose a color to apply to my stroke. If I wanted to go in and I want to edit this, I edit this just like I would a normal line. I can simply click and pull on my pull handles, and this allows me to adjust the length of the line, and that's about it. I would need to go in and adjust the point size from here on out. If I would like to convert this to an actual shape so that it is no longer a line that has a stroke, and I would like this to be a flattened rectangle with rounded ends, and I would like to edit it as such, I can then go under my Edit menu, or my Object menu, under Path, because this is a line here. What I can do is I can outline the stroke of my object. When I outline the stroke of my object, it is no longer a path, it is no longer a stroke and fill, it is no longer adjusted by the point size of it. It now becomes an actual object. You see up in the control bar, there is no more stroke. The stroke color went away, and I brought up my fill color. And now it is an actual shape. And from this point on, there is no more stroke unless I put a stroke around this shape. This can be quite handy when I'm trying to create objects that have consistent borders around them, but I would like these objects to be a solid fill rather than being a stroke. Because I may be going in and adjusting these objects here, and I want to have them adjust and not remember to say, oh, I forgot when I adjusted this, my scale stroke wasn't on, so when I made it smaller, it didn't scale the stroke. If I take this object, and I then go under the Object menu under Path, and I create this into an outline, it is now an actual object. Okay? There is no stroke here. It looks like it's a nice border, but it is now actually a fill, which is controlled by the fill, and therefore I have no border around that object. When I'm trying to create consistent with objects here, I will draw the object, put a specific stroke on there, and then convert that to an actual shape so that I use my fill instead of my stroke to fill that color. And then when I scale it, I know everything is going to scale proportionately. We're going to constantly go back between fill and strokes. We're going to show you why some are going to work better in some instances and why not. But when we get into our Pathfinder tool, this is going to be an important lesson that we have to learn, because paths and strokes don't combine in the Pathfinder tool. So it's just a quick little run through on strokes themselves. Okay, so there's the stroke panel right there. I'm just going to close out of that there so we don't have that sitting up there. Now I'm going to go through and actually edit my shapes. So going through with my direct selection tool here, now that I've converted this into a shape, you can see I can go in and I can edit the shape using my direct selection tool. This is no longer a path, and I can edit this independently of everything else. If this were a border around here or a stroke around my object like this, and I wanted to go in and I wanted to edit this shape using my direct selection tool, then my path is going to be edited, and that path is going to continue along with my shape. Because I converted this path to an object, now when I change the object there, I no longer have the consistency around there. All depends on what I want to do with my shape. Going through and editing my shape here with rounded corners, this is where the widgets come in. So, new feature. And when I draw a shape now, this comes up as default, and these are my little corner widgets. Let me change this to a color that's going to offer some more contrast. Under the View menu, I can have, under View, go down to the bottom here, I've got my Smart Guides, here's my corner widgets. If you do not like those little automatic corner items right there, those are your corner widgets. By default, they're turned on. I click my object, and there's my corner widgets. And I'm going to zoom in real close. We can see how that works. Now, I could have just drawn and used my up or down arrows to control that, but I'm going to control these later. By going and hovering over the edge or over that little corner widget, I get my cursor with a little arc. And if I click on that and I pull in and out, it's going to allow me to adjust those corners symmetrically all the way on through. Now, part of that is being able to just go and do that as a standard item. Over here in my transform palette, which comes up every single time I draw a rounded corner, if I unlink the corner radius right here and I decide to click on one of these, you'll see that it still works in conjunction, okay? So I do that, and even though I've unlinked it over here in the transform, it still keeps everything together. So I would have to go over here and edit these separately, or I can use this nice little feature. So first off, when I want to go in here and edit this, it's always going to default as a rounded corner. If I hold down my Option key and I Option click here on those corners, you'll see I'll be able to cycle through those corners, okay? The cursor changes, and that's just Option clicking through those corners as well, which is great. Okay, wonderful. And I can click and pull, Option click, cycles through the whole thing, wonderful. What happens if I want to adjust just one corner here? Well, that's easily done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my direct selection tool, and I'm just going to click and drag over that one corner. So I've specifically selected just those corner points, and now my little corner widget is all by itself. So if I want to create a container that has 2 square corners and 2 round corners, I can just do a direct selection tool, drag my widgets, change my widgets, whatever way, and now I have my resulting shape. And I can also go through here, and I can also create my corners as well, and I can say, okay, I want, more of a corner here, I want less of a corner here as well, put these all together and adjust it that way too, if I don't feel like going in and doing my direct selection tool. Whatever corners I select, I can go ahead and adjust. If I want to click and drag and adjust those 2 at once, I can just click and drag over those or these, and therefore I can adjust them. If not, you still have your transform, where you can go in there and visually unlink those settings so that you have the control over these corners separately, and then you can control them overall. Now, the default, once I've drawn my rounded corners, if I want to reduce my object here, these are 1/2 inch rounded corners, so if I reduce this down, those corners stay the exact same size. That may work for me, that may not. I may want them to. So when I scale that, you'll see that they scale all together. Okay, maybe I want to do that, maybe I don't. If I don't want them to do that, I will need to go into my Scale Rectangle Corners so that I've got my corners to be scaled. Now when I do that, they are going to scale so that I keep everything in proportion. This may be much more visually appealing too, and once we apply containers inside of containers, we want the radiuses to reduce as we go. But it's something that you have to make mental note of and do this every time you're working with this if you do want them to scale or you don't want them to scale. Turn that on, turn that off. And there it is. So in this case, I do want them to scale because I may want to keep them proportionate. So there's my rounded corners. Simple and easy to do. And again, if I'm drawing my corners here and I want to do this dynamically, I can just draw and use my up arrow, which is going to increase the corners, down arrow is going to reduce the corners, and this is something that's been around for quite some time. What's new are the corner widgets and the ability to automatically adjust. That's new in the Creative Cloud, and the way it adjusts now, even more so that it automatically comes up with this. This is the 2014 update. Just a little tidbit, if you have not updated your Illustrator, it still has live corners, but the live corners don't become active with the selection tool active. What you need to do is you need to select your direct selection tool, select the corner, and then your live corners are going to become active. And that's only if you have Creative Cloud and you have not updated to 2014. just a little bit of a snafu in there. Nonetheless, you still have your live corners, but now it's called corner widgets because they changed the name yet again. So I can go through, and another cool thing that we can do as well is when I draw a star too, that's a little bit too much. Let's do 10 points on this. When I go in and do this, you'll see that anything that has a point on it, anything that has a corner, can also be adjusted. So clearly I'm never going to get a corner widget on a circle or a line, but I can get it on any point that's going to have corners. So here I can go in and I can adjust this, which is kind of nice if I want to do, you know, like a little kind of simulated gear item as well. And I can pull those all the way out to get the normal star. Now you'll notice that once I get to the point where I'm at my limit, everything's going to turn red. That is also a new feature. That's as far as I can go with that. So if I want to do a bottle cap or something like that, kind of cool. If I want to go in and I want to do just certain ones here, I would have to go in and I would have to physically select holding down the Shift key and shift and click over each one of those points there to isolate them. A little bit more of a hassle, but there we go. And then I'd be able to just go in and adjust those points that I select independent of the other points, and I can create a nice little sun very easily. Now we're getting into building things. Wow, look at that. So again, you'll see that I have all my little points right there. If I click on one, I can change just one. So, you know, then I can create some type of little Batman symbol right there and do that, you know, some type of little bursty thing, who knows, okay? Live corners are right there. Super, super, super sweet. Love it. All done with your direct selection tool. Now, I can also go in with my direct selection tool, and here's where having all these little corner widgets can be kind of a hassle. If I go in here and I just want to adjust a little specific point, I certainly can, just by dragging that point. So I can still do that separately there. It's just that when I click on there, I now have all the corner widgets. So it may be nice to shut off your corner widgets so you don't see all those extra little icons there, but it's just something to get used to as you're working. You can still adjust all those corners independently. Okay, so now we know how to make a sun, and that's the same way we can also go in and do like a little cupcake pan too, by the way, folks. For those of you that want to do baking stuff, you know, go in, take your little corner widgets, there you go. You know, little baking thing, little gear, bottle cap, you name it, there you go. Now you got that. Take a star, drag your little corner widgets. Simple three-step process. Right there. Going in and working a little bit more with the fill and stroke on this as well. Going in and picking up objects or fills and strokes from other objects here. One of the great things is using your eyedropper tool. If I want to pick up attributes from another object, so I've got my fill and stroke right here. I'm going to bring my fill to the front. My eyedropper tool is great for picking up other attributes. If I take my eyedropper tool and I click on any other fill object there, it just sucks up the fill object and applies it to the object that I have selected as well. If I go in and I do my stroke as well, it's going to pick up all the attributes. This one has no fill, but it has a stroke. So whatever I click on there, it just simply picks up those attributes nice and quick instead of trying to figure out which one was which and hunt through my list of colors. Now when it comes to creating objects here and being able to duplicate and transform these objects, I want to be able to go in and duplicate these things rather quickly. So if I have an object right here and I want to duplicate this, I can go in and I can do copy and then I can do paste. Paste is always going to paste right in the middle of my screen. It doesn't matter where my pasteboard is. When I hit paste, it pastes right in the middle of the screen. So why do two steps when one will work just fine? And that one step is going to be Option, click, and drag. And you'll see when I do that, my cursor is going to double up when I'm selecting that. There's the Option key held down, and that tells me I can go ahead and duplicate my object. So I can very easily duplicate my object, hover over the outside edges, which allows me to then go in and rotate my object, Again, if I hold down my Shift key and constrain, I can do that. And with that, I can also begin to move things around, and I can also get things to align. And thanks to my smart guides, which we're going to use constantly, the smart guides are going to allow me to align things up on the page. And you can see those little smart guides flashing. Those are going to align top, bottom, left, right, and center with the object that we're moving to any other object on the page, top, bottom, left, right, or center. The more objects that you have on your page, the more smart guides are going to be flashing around. Under the View menu, this is where we have our guides, and we can go ahead and turn on and turn off our guides right here. But our smart guides are right there, Command U or Control U. They are on by default. I don't recommend turning them off because it allows you to snap right to your particular objects. Now, one thing that Illustrator is weird with is if I take an object and I move it, and I try to move it back, it tends to snap right back in its original location. So if something is a little bit off, and I'm trying to get it lined up here, it has a tendency to try to snap back its original location. Most of the time I have to move it out of the way and let go, and then come back and snap it back into location. If you're trying to move it just a little bit with the mouse, it doesn't like to move just like it should. It likes to snap right back to it. So Option click and drag is a great way to duplicate your objects, and then of course hover over the outside edge to go ahead and rotate that object. And I could then just do my Option click and drag here, rotate this object as well, and put that into position. And before you know it, by Option clicking and dragging and rotating here, I have something that looks very much like a nice little icon for a plant or a windmill or something like that. Nice little rounded corners, little leaves, symmetrical, all by going in and doing my Option click and drag. Awesome. Wonderful. Works great. If we really wanted to, we could get crazy here and we could rotate this and we could throw a nice little stem on there, put that right in there, and then I could adjust that shape. Now, if this were a stroke, and I were working with this, and I were to take this stroke and I were to pull on the ends here, those rounded ends would stay symmetrical. Because this is a shape, and I pull on this whole thing, what it's going to do is it's going to distort the ends, okay? You can see the more I pull it, the more distorted those ends become. Well, the reason why this does it is because, first of all, these are not the live little corners right here. I had taken this and I converted this, so if I pull this a really long way, it's going to go ahead and distort those ends, something that Illustrator loves to do. I would have to take my direct selection tool and select just those points that I want to pull, nothing else, so that I'm not literally stretching the entire object, and then pull the whole thing down here, of course, while holding my Shift key so that I keep everything constrained. Because this started out as a line with caps, now that I converted it to a shape, I don't have that ability to keep that rounded end as I change the size of my shape. And now I've got a little kid's windmill right here, which looks just perfect. Yeah, line that up right there, and there you go. Nice little icon for something. I can take a whole bunch of objects together, select them together, not actually grouping them, but I can select them together, and I can rotate them together as well. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and even better yet, look at that. Now I'm going to go and put that in my center, and now I got my nice little windmill there, just like so. Nice little icon. Probably don't even need a little bar. Just take that right out of there. Great little icon. You can call it whatever you want it to be. Want to go in and I want to change the corners on here and round those? Yep, I could just go and I could pull those in. Actually, I'm going to pull just this corner right there, and I could pull that in, change that, round it one way or another, make a prop out of it, windmill, plant, you name it. Nice and simple.